other than ERP?
There are enterprise integration type of systems out there. They generally deal only, however, with the data, okay, and not with the business processes and the organizations that surround that data. So you're still working inside of that silo, okay? You've sliced the silo a different way, but you're still inside of the silo. You're not integrating the whole organization and the whole business purpose for being by going that way.
Yeah, and usually most banks use the ERP system as well.
Most organizations that decide to go this way go to one of the big ERP vendors. There are some small ones out there that you can get. As a general rule, they don't have as much capability. They're not as flexible, but they also don't cost as much. So, just as an example, I went out and looked and pulled in. These are the SAP modules, the integrated SAP modules. You can see there's a lot of, they cover a lot of ground, okay? And I'm not gonna read this to you, but if you basically, regardless of what kind of business you're in, you can pretty well cover the ground with that. So in the interest of time, that's all I'm going to say right now on the enterprise system. We're going to spend some more time on it later, I think. But are there any questions? Did I answer your question first off, Chris?
Yeah, I was confused as to what the enterprise, I thought it was basically like one software system that's trying to be an umbrella to bring in all these other softwares and try to integrate it into one master.
That is one way to implement it. That tends to get into a lot of that customization that I was talking about. Okay.
Because I haven't used SAP for Oracle. I mean, obviously I've heard the name, and I see what it can do and stuff like that, but I've not actually worked with it as a daily tool. The best I've got to any type of repository of data has been like Interlink with Crowley, BPM with Katia, and the likes.
Right.
But beyond that, you're talking about this gap of emptiness, this space between you and the next level.
Yep, that's exactly right. And it is a pretty big jump. This implementing an enterprise integration project is a major undertaking. It is a rethink of the way you do business. But as companies become more and more global, and as we start to some of the lines that have been drawn in the world, imaginary lines between industries, between countries, between cultures, are blurring. It's becoming more and more important that you have an integrated, agile, rapid way of getting to a single set of data and doing something with it, something of value. That's the whole point, is to be able to use that data to do something of value. Yeah?
Now, is SAP considered as a database?
SAP has a database underneath it.
Like the Oracle database?
It's not Oracle, it's SAP's, SAP's own, but yes, it's like an Oracle database. It has a database underneath it, and if you want, we can spend some time talking about the structure of it, but hadn't planned to do that tonight, okay? But I can pull some stuff and we can talk about it. But it's got a database underneath it, and then it's got an integration layer, and then it's got the application layers, and then it's got tentacles and feeds and ways of going out and grabbing things from other places, as well as letting them feed in. And all of them work basically that way.
Yeah, I had a class about Oracle and MySQL database, so I know that one is also.
Yeah. Yeah. If you think of this would be sort of the top layer. Oracle would be about 3 feet or so back of the blackboard, way down underneath. That's down in the that's back at the enterprise database level. Okay, your ERP system, what people think of as the ERP system, because that's the part that they interface with, is this layer here. Okay.
Now, what is the definition of pervasive controls?
Pervasive controls are the ones that are out there, that are watching the system as it's working. They are pervasive in that they are resident in the actual entities. They're not something necessarily that you're managing or handling like you are when you're doing a drawing. Okay, but they're your access control software, your snooper software, your invasion detection software, the stuff that happens in the background. Okay? If there aren't any other questions, then I'm going to jump ahead here real quick. I hadn't planned to cover it quite this quickly, but sometimes best laid plans.
That's a modified version of what was in Unit 1 before?
Yes. What I did was I took most of the slides that were in Unit 1 and combined some of them, and then added a couple of examples at the end. So. Unit 2, then, let's go into a quick discussion without the computer while it's booting up. While it's bringing it up. I don't think I got the wrong one there. That wasn't the one I wanted. I'm going to move into modeling and the whole concept of, once you understand the enterprise and what it is, one of the first things that you have to do if you're going into one of these enterprise integration projects is to understand what you have. Okay, how does it currently work? You can't figure out how to make it any better until you understand what it is now. So that, one of the very best ways to do that is to model it. A model is a visual representation. It's a picture. People see in pictures, they think in pictures. If you can give it to them in a picture, they'll remember it. You give it to them in words, they'll never remember it. Okay? So you want to do a graphical representation. You use it to gain some understanding, to identify where your deficiencies are. Okay, you have an output here that's not going anywhere. You have an input that's not coming from anything. These may be problems in your model, or they may be problems in your process. Okay, and then they aid in communication because people can talk to them, they can understand them. You can do two different types of approaches to models. You can go from the top down. Okay, starting at, this is what we want to be when we grow up, to, okay, how does that break down into the various functional areas? Or you can go bottom up. You can say, okay, this is what we do. This is the screen that you use. This is the screen that you use. This is the report that you generate. And bring, okay, what data is involved in those? And then trace those data trails back, so like unrolling a bowl of spaghetti, okay? Trace those data trails back and figure out where they come from so you know what you need to keep and what's out there doing nothing at all. Because inevitably you're going to find a whole potload of those. Or reports that somebody needed 10 years ago and you're still doing them just because nobody said stop. Okay? Find a lot of those too. There's, again, a couple different approaches to modeling. You can either have, and the two primary different approaches in the different modeling tools that are out there. One is an emphasis on the process. Okay, the process is your main character. And then the outputs, inputs, outputs, etc., the things, if you will, are the connectors. The other side of that is exactly the flip side, just like we talked last week about net present value versus net future value. They're mirror images of each other. The flip side of that is what's called object-oriented, and that is where the things are your main characters, and the connections between them, the verbs, if you will, are the arrows. IDEF is the first one. Your process is your main character, and your things inputs, outputs, constraints are the arrows. UML is the other way. Your entities, your classes, your things, your people, places, and reports, etc. Things that mean something in the real world are the main characters, and the connections between them are the verbs. Is a, has a, lives at. Okay? That's really the biggest difference between them. There's some other things too. Okay? IDEF, which is integrated definition, is process focused. Okay, that shows in its structure. It is very highly structured. It was developed for and by the military. Okay, and anybody who's ever dealt with the military knows that every I is dotted and every T is crossed, and never shall you deviate from that. Okay, so there are a lot of rules and regulations. It's still a pretty good model for modeling an organization and how it functions. Okay. UML came out of the software industry. What's important to the software industry? The things. You start with the part, taking it to engineering, and you work on how does that interface? How does that link? How does it, okay, what are the touch points? So it's a different mindset. Okay? They work together. They are very, very good at working together. UML has some deficiencies, just like IDEF does. UFL, tell where my brain is. UML is not highly structured, and although it is a standard, that standard has been adapted and expanded by every organization that's ever used it. Okay? So UML put out by IBM and Rational Rose is not the same as UML put out by Oracle and Oracle Designer, is not the same as UML put out by Microsoft and Visio, is not the same as UML put out by Metastorm. Okay? They're all slightly different. They have the same core, but they won't talk to each other. IDEF, on the other hand, because it is so highly regimented, does. It also, depending on how people think, isn't necessarily as descriptive. Okay, UML, because it's focused on things, customers. People know what customers are. Okay, they understand that term, as opposed to create customer work. That can mean a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people. Okay, so. But some people are the process types, and they think in terms of the process, and they relate better to that. They work together, as I was saying. They have advantages and disadvantages. We're going to use both. There are a whole lot of other types and languages of modeling. I went out to Wikipedia this afternoon and looked at it. They list 20 different types of modeling languages out there. We're not going to deal with a lot of them. Okay, these are the two big ones that are in use, and in reality, IDEF isn't all that well used. Okay, it's starting to lose some of its hold because the military is subject to some of the same constraints that the rest of us are, and they're having to go to commercially available rather than writing their own because of cash problems. So things are moving towards the UML as the standard. Yeah.
Yeah, which software we can